Okay, so now I want to explain what anxiety actually is. Anxiety is simply an emotion. It is an emotion just like happiness is an emotion, just like excitement is an emotion. So, why is it that anxiety is so grossly misunderstood? In the last episode, I covered this and explained what anxiety is not. You can click on the link in the description to watch that video, which basically explains that anxiety is not caused by a chemical imbalance. Fact 1. Anxiety is not caused by a chemical imbalance. To understand that anxiety is simply an emotion, let's talk about the emotion of excitement, and I will relate it to anxiety to make it simple to understand. Now, imagine for a second that you are looking forward to something, such as going to the movies on Friday night, or going to a concert, or even imagining something that may never happen, such as winning the lottery. If you really start to imagine these things vividly, you might find that you will start triggering feelings of excitement. Now, because the feeling of excitement feels pleasurable to us, we don't see this as a problem and we are happy to enjoy this feeling. So we don't try to fight it, and the feeling of excitement naturally fades away as we shift our focus onto thinking about or doing something else. Now, with anxiety, this feeling is caused by us thinking or imagining that something bad might happen. For example, we might worry that a speech that we have to give will go badly, and we might imagine that we will stumble our words and that people will notice us sweating and turning red in the face. We might think to ourselves that we are not good enough, such as that we are too short or too fat, or focus on something about ourselves that we don't like, and then tell ourselves that people won't accept us because of this perceived flaw. We may tell ourselves all kinds of stories and imagine many worst-case scenarios. Now, whilst imagining good things happening to us will trigger excitement, imagining bad things happening to us will trigger anxiety. Like I said with excitement, we are happy to feel like this, so we do nothing about it, and the excitement naturally dissipates as we shift our focus onto something else. With anxiety, most of us do not like to feel anxious, and we often don't just stop imagining bad things happening to us and then allowing and letting the anxiety naturally dissipate. No, because the feeling is uncomfortable, what we do instead is try to fight it. And if we don't understand this, we will continue to fight it and perhaps even seek treatment for it. If we also believe that anxiety is something other than an emotion, such as a chemical imbalance or a major mental disorder, then we might again seek treatment for it. Also, if we continue to fight with the emotion of anxiety, we will never overcome it. Fact 2. Anxiety is an emotion. It is really simple to understand this connection between what we focus on and what we feel. If you imagine winning the lottery, and you start to focus on all the houses and cars that you're going to buy when this happens, then you might start to feel excited. If you imagine a good time you had when you were a kid, you might feel happy. If you give yourself a pat on the back for graduating high school, you might feel proud. If you imagine a loved one being sick or dying, then you might feel sad. Anxiety is no different. If you imagine that something bad might happen to you, then you will have that feeling of anxiety. I think the feeling of fear and anxiety is essentially the same, but I usually like to make the distinction to people that fear is real while anxiety is not. For example, if you see a car coming towards you on the footpath at 100 miles an hour, that feeling of intense adrenaline that makes you jump out of the way is fear. Whilst if you just imagine a car coming towards you at 100 miles an hour and you feel a similar way, then that is anxiety. Now, you might have different views of the difference between fear and anxiety, but that is how I like to explain it to people. I like to explain it like this to keep things simple, to demonstrate that fear and anxiety is basically the same feeling. Fact 3. We create the feeling of anxiety when we imagine that something bad will happen. So now that we have established that we feel anxiety, or imagined fear as I like to call it, whenever we imagine that something bad might happen to us, or when we simply beat ourselves up for our perceived flaws, then basically all we need to do is to stop imagining these things. For example, all we have to do to stop feeling excited, in the example I gave earlier, is to stop imagining that we are going to win the lottery. We may not just literally instantly stop thinking about it, but we might start to think more objectively and tell ourselves that winning the lottery is highly unlikely, or we might change our focus onto thinking about something else or doing something else. The feeling of excitement then naturally fades away. That is exactly what we need to do when we feel anxious. We need to tell ourselves that these things that we are imagining are highly unlikely, and then move on to thinking about and doing something else. If we could do that, we would notice that our anxiety would also naturally fade away. Fact 4. Imagining that something bad will happen is like pouring petrol onto a fire. Putting things in perspective and telling ourselves that these things are very unlikely, or focusing on something more productive or uplifting, is like pouring water onto the fire. Now, I agree that this is easier said than done. And no, it is not that simple when we put things into practice. I will tell you right now that overcoming from anxiety, especially severe anxiety, can be incredibly difficult. But I wanted to show from a theoretical perspective that anxiety is simple to understand. Exercise 1. Whenever you begin to imagine that something bad will happen, this could include imagining getting laughed at during an oral presentation, or imagining being rejected by somebody because of an apparent flaw you have, or any other scenario that you often find yourself thinking fearfully about. Whenever you catch yourself imagining these worst case scenarios, begin to notice how you feel. If you notice that you start to feel more and more anxious, the more you imagine this and the more extreme you imagine it, then you now know that you are creating your anxiety. Yes, you are creating it. Just like you imagining winning the lottery will trigger the feeling of excitement, imagining worst case scenarios will trigger the feeling of anxiety. If you have a specific thing that you are worried about, please put it in the comment section and I will explain how to think in a more balanced way about it, and better yet, how to shift your focus onto something more uplifting. By thinking in a more balanced way and behaving in accordance with our thoughts and visions, we can really begin to start reducing our anxiety. Fact 5. You create your own anxiety. This is empowering because that means that if you create your own anxiety, then you also control your own anxiety. Because you control it, you can begin to reduce and finally eliminate it. Exercise 2. Next time you start to predict and imagine a worst case scenario in an upcoming event that you have, this could be giving a speech or simply meeting your friends out on Friday night. The situation itself does not really matter. But when you notice yourself imagining the worst case scenario, stop for a second and start imagining the best case scenario. Now, you don't even have to believe that the best case scenario will play out in the way you imagine it, but why not just give yourself 5 minutes to imagine the best case scenario and see if you notice a difference in how you feel. You have been worrying about worst case scenarios, and that hasn't worked, so please give this a try. The best case scenario might not actually happen, but what it will do is trigger feelings of calmness, which will allow you to handle any given situation much more effectively with much less anxiety. Fact 6. Imagining the worst case scenario will make you feel anxious. Imagining the best case scenario will make you feel calm and possibly even excited. So, in this episode, I wanted to keep this video brief and simple because sometimes when we have anxiety, we need a simple explanation, as it is often difficult to think clearly and think about very technical explanations when our minds are bogged down. But perhaps I can cover a deeper and more technical explanation of anxiety in a future video if you comment below and let me know if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, so in the next episode, I want to talk about anxiety symptoms. I will talk about the anxiety symptoms that I have experienced in my journey and how you can begin to reduce and eventually eliminate them from your life. So please subscribe to this channel if you value the information I have presented in this video and would like to see more videos like this. And please click the bell notification so you are alerted to my videos as soon as they are published. I would also love to hear your thoughts and comments. I will definitely try my best to read them and get back to you.